Organizations are making the same expensive mistakes when migrating to SharePoint Online, and it's costing them thousands of dollars in wasted time, storage fees, and project delays. In this video, we're covering the 5 most common migration mistakes that drain IT budgets, and more importantly, how to avoid them. Let's get started. The number 1 mistake organizations make is launching migrations without proper assessment. This is the primary cause of budget overruns. Reality Tech reports that 68% of organizations discover redundant data costing $15,000 plus per year in storage fees only after migration, which they describe as significantly more expensive to remediate once data is already in Microsoft 365. Microsoft's migration guidance repeatedly stresses that planning and assessment are essential for a successful migration. In many failed migrations, teams don't allocate enough time to planning and assessment, then pay for it later in rework, scope changes, and delays. Here's what happens. Teams often discover more issues than expected during migration, especially around permissions, path length, unsupported customizations, and stale content. That's how scope creep happens. The work grows, but the timeline and budget don't. How to avoid this mistake? Use the SharePoint Migration Assessment Tool, SMAT, to scan SharePoint server content before moving anything. Also, SPMT 4.0 introduced an integrated SharePoint server assessment experience, which makes running pre-migration scans easier for many teams. For very large migrations, like those over 100 terabytes, plan for throttling, pilot first, schedule waves, and involve Microsoft support early if you need guidance on capacity planning. The second major mistake is treating SharePoint like a file server with a lift and shift mentality. This approach destroys migration ROI. Here's the reality. Many SharePoint environments were designed years ago. Migrating without restructuring the architecture means you're just bringing old problems into a new system. Modern migrations face new architectural constraints that didn't exist in earlier SharePoint versions. The 400-character decoded path limit, folder path plus file name, can break deeply nested structures migrated from file shares. The 5,000 item list view threshold is a query/view performance safeguard. You can store far more than 5,000 items, but unindexed views and certain operations can hit throttling. Microsoft recommends syncing no more than approximately 300,000 items for performance, as issues can appear when libraries are very large, even if users don't sync everything. So what's changed since 2023? It's the introduction of SharePoint agents and Microsoft 365 Copilot that creates entirely new requirements for content organization. Poorly structured content will produce poor AI results, adding long-term costs to architectural shortcuts. Here's how to avoid this mistake. Microsoft now recommends hub sites as the foundation of SharePoint architecture. Promote subsites to independent site collections connected through hub associations before migration and not after. This provides flexibility for future reorganization. When users don't adopt Microsoft 365 tools, organizations lose much of the value they paid for, even if the technology is fully deployed. A McAfee study revealed a stark adoption gap. While 79.1% of organizations deploy OneDrive for Business, only 18.6% actively use it. For SharePoint and Exchange combined, adoption rates fell below 8%. This adoption gap directly affects project outcomes and budgets. Approximately 67% of SharePoint implementations stall due to low adoption associated with ineffective training. A common staffing mistake is building migration teams almost entirely from IT personnel, when research suggests the optimal composition is 70% business stakeholders and 30% IT. Most organizations have this ratio inverted. The operational and financial costs of poor adoption include increased IT support ticket volume, shadow IT proliferation, adding 30 to 40% additional spending. Underutilization of collaboration features that were the original business case for the migration. Longer time to value, with expected productivity gains delayed for months or never realized at all. How to avoid this mistake? Microsoft now recommends using Viva Learning as a centralized training hub, combined with SharePoint Champions networks and role-based training programs. Post-migration hypercare periods with dedicated support are now commonly used in high-performing Microsoft 365 implementations. Now to the 4th mistake. This shift became operationally significant starting in 2023. Microsoft 365 Copilot uses SharePoint as its primary citation source, making permission misconfigurations immediately visible to users rather than remaining hidden in the background. Years of permission sprawl, such as everyone except external users, anyone links, and broken permission inheritance, now result in sensitive files being discoverable by users who were never intended to see them. Here's what I see happening. Teams rush to replicate their existing permissions during migration without evaluating whether the setup actually aligns with how access should work. Getting the security model right is one of the most critical aspects of a SharePoint migration, not just copying it over. Previously, organizations commonly migrated content first and addressed permission issues after the fact. Now, migrated content with broad permissions will immediately be surfaced by Copilot to anyone with access, potentially exposing sensitive documents to any employee whose permissions allow Copilot to surface them. How to avoid this mistake? Microsoft now includes SharePoint Advanced Management at no additional cost with Copilot licenses to help identify and remediate oversharing. Run oversharing baseline reports via SharePoint Online PowerShell before migration. Identify and remove or replace everyone's sharing with role-based or group-based permissions. Implement sensitivity labels as part of the migration process rather than afterward. Third-party tools like ShareGate and AvePoint have added Microsoft Information Protection integration to ensure sensitivity labels are retained and enforced during migration. Last but not the least, one of the most time-sensitive mistakes organizations are making today is failing to plan for SharePoint 2013 workflow retirement on April 2, 2026. Microsoft has confirmed this deadline will not be extended, with full removal from all tenants, including government and DoD. CIO Magazine quantifies the cost of delay. Each quarter of migration delay increases costs by 15 to 20%. A migration costing $500,000 now could exceed $1.2 million to $1.5 million by mid-2026 if mismanaged. Organizations relying on Nintex workflows faced an even earlier cutoff, with support ending on December 31, 2025. How to avoid this mistake? Microsoft updated SPMT version 4.1 to support migrating SharePoint Designer 2010 and 2013 workflows to Power Automate using a Microsoft-supported approach. However, complex workflows with custom code or external integrations require manual rebuilding. Begin a full inventory and assessment of your workflows immediately. Use the Microsoft 365 assessment tool to scan your tenant and produce a list of all active SharePoint 2013 workflows before the April 2026 deadline. Let's bring this together with what really matters for your SharePoint migration. Organizations that allocate 20 to 25% of their timeline to planning and 30 to 40% to testing consistently deliver migrations with fewer delays, lower rework, and better user adoption than those that rush straight to execution. The window for action is narrowing quickly. With workflow retirement less than 4 months away and Copilot adoption accelerating, the most expensive mistake at this point is waiting too long to address these risks. If you found this helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Mr. SharePoint for more SharePoint tutorials. Thanks for watching.